You're listening to The Final Frequency. Cold Frequency. The case of Elara Voss. 25 days. I haven't slept properly since Render Road. I want to say that not as an excuse for anything, but because I think you're owed an honest account of the state of the person bringing you this. And the state of that person, 5 days on, is tired in a way that goes past hours and into something else. The kind of tired where you start hearing the phone ring before it rings. I'm not going to dwell on that. I mention it once, and then we move forward, because what F brought me this week doesn't leave room for dwelling. Let me recap, briefly, where we left things. I stood under the camera that filmed Elara's last known movements, a camera too new for a site that's supposedly been closed for 2 years. I watched a gray car watch me for 40 minutes, and learned its registration traces back to a government fleet framework for, in their words, authorized contractors. F found an effluent survey, never digitized, buried in the paper archive, describing continuous industrial process operation at Callaway, with cooling demand and organic load in the waste stream. Signed for by a second company, one we hadn't named. And then 2 calls. The detective telling me the missing footage was taken above the investigation's head, and the other voice, the one that's called before, telling me that the question isn't whether Elara is alive. The question is what she is now part of. F told me 3 weeks ago that she had one more file in her, one more risk, and then she was done. And I told her that was more than enough, that she'd already done more than her share. She came to me on Tuesday, and she said, "I lied. There's one more thing. And I think you need to see it before I burn every copy of it that exists, including the one in my head. This is cold frequency. This is cold storage. And this is the night I found out Callaway was never the only one." We met at the same cafe as before. F arrived early again. This time she didn't order coffee. She had a single sheet of paper, folded into quarters, and she put it on the table between us and didn't touch it again for the rest of the conversation, like it was something she didn't want her fingerprints on any more than they already were. She looked different this week. Thinner somehow, in 5 days, though I think that's not possible, and what I actually mean is that she looked like someone carrying something heavier. She said, "The effluent survey had a signature line. I told you that. A receiving signature on behalf of the site operator, and under it, printed, a company name. I told you I wasn't going to say the name on air yet, because I wanted one chance to look at it before it knew it had been seen. I had that chance. I looked. And then I wished I hadn't, because now I can't not know it. The company is called Greyling Clinical Solutions. I want to say that name plainly, once, and then talk about what it is, because the name itself tells you almost nothing, and that's deliberate. Greyling Clinical Solutions is registered as providing, and I'm reading directly from the public filing, specialist logistics and waste management services to the healthcare and life sciences sector. Specialist logistics, waste management, healthcare and life sciences. Every one of those words is true. None of them tells you anything. F had done what she always does, quietly, carefully, in the gaps of her actual job. Greyling Clinical Solutions has been operating for 9 years. It holds contracts. She found 4, all matters of public record if you know exactly where to look, which nobody does unless they're already looking, with NHS trusts, with private hospital groups, and with what the filings describe as research partner sites. Research partner sites. I asked her what that meant. She said, on paper, it means laboratories, universities, pharmaceutical companies, places that generate biological waste that needs specialist handling and disposal. Greyling collects it, transports it, processes it. That's the business. That's the whole business, as far as 9 years of public filings are concerned. And the effluent survey puts Greyling Clinical Solutions, a specialist medical waste company, signing for access to an industrial estate that's supposedly been closed for 2 years, with continuous industrial process operation, cooling demand, and organic load in the waste stream. Organic load. I asked F the question I'd been sitting with since Render Road. I said, "Organic load. In the context of a medical waste survey, what does that actually mean? What's the load?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at the folded paper on the table for a long moment. She said, "It means biological material. That's all the term tells you on its own. It's deliberately generic. It covers everything from laboratory tissue samples to—" She stopped again. She said, "To anything else that's organic. The term doesn't specify. That's what makes it useful, if you're the kind of person who needs a term that doesn't specify." I didn't ask her to go further. I think we both understood that we'd reached the edge of what either of us wanted to say out loud, in a cafe, on a Tuesday. Here's what was on the folded sheet. F finally turned it over, about 10 minutes into our conversation, and slid it across the table, and I photographed it. With her permission this time, which itself tells you something about where F has arrived in all of this. 3 weeks ago, she wouldn't let anything leave that cafe except in her own memory. This week, she wanted a copy to exist somewhere other than just with her. That's not a good sign. I want to be honest about that. People who are about to disappear from a story start wanting copies to exist elsewhere. The sheet was a list. Not a long one, 6 entries. Each entry was a site name, a local authority area, and a single date. The first entry was Callaway Industrial Estate. The date next to it was from 14 months ago, the same date as the effluent survey. Greyling's signature, the one we already knew about. The other 5 entries were different sites, different towns, different counties, some of them. This isn't local. This is spread across the country. F said, "I found this because once I had Greyling's name, I could search for it properly. Not in planning records this time, in something more obscure. Environmental permit applications. Greyling holds a specialist waste carrier's license, and that license requires them to register every site they operate at. It's a national register. Nobody reads it. I read it. 6 sites, all registered to Greyling Clinical Solutions, under the same license over the past 4 years. All of them, and I checked every one. This took most of a weekend, listed in their local planning records as decommissioned or disused, or in one case, demolished. Demolished. One of the 6 sites, according to its own local council, doesn't exist anymore. There's a satellite image of an empty field where the buildings used to be. And Greyling's National Waste Carrier registration says they're operating there, currently, as of 3 months ago, when the registration was last renewed. I think I actually said something out loud at that point. Not a word, just a sound, because F looked up at me for the first time since she'd put the paper down, and she said, "Yeah, that's the one that did it for me, too." An empty field with an active waste license for continuous industrial process operation. Callaway is not unique. Callaway is not even, as far as we can tell, special. Callaway is one node, one of at least 6, in something that has existed, quietly, registered in plain sight on a document nobody reads, for at least 4 years. I want to pause the main thread here, because something arrived this week that I think belongs in this episode specifically. It's about Greyling, and it came from someone who has never contacted me before, and who I believe had no way of knowing what F and I had found, because the message arrived 2 days before our meeting. The message is from a man I'll call N. He says he drove for a haulage subcontractor for about a year, 2 years ago. He says the subcontractor had a standing arrangement with, and he named them, unprompted, Greyling Clinical Solutions. He named them, before I knew the name myself. N's job, for that year, was simple. Once or twice a month, he'd collect a sealed container from a hospital loading bay, always late at night, always the same procedure, paperwork already completed, nothing for him to sign beyond an acknowledgement of collection, and drive it to a transfer point. He'd hand it off there to a different vehicle, a Greyling vehicle, and that was the end of his involvement. He said the work was unremarkable. Medical waste haulage is a real industry. It's regulated. It's mostly exactly as boring as it sounds. He did this for a year and thought nothing of it. Until one night, he said, the handoff didn't happen the way it normally did. He said, normally I'd just leave the container at the transfer point, a lay-by, always the same lay-by, off a B road, and drive off. The Greyling vehicle would arrive within the hour. I never saw it. That was the arrangement. But this one night, I was early. Traffic was light. I made good time, and I got there 40 minutes ahead of schedule. So I waited. And the Greyling vehicle came early, too. He said he watched, from his cab, headlights off, the way you do when you're early somewhere and don't want to draw attention to it, as two people got out of the Greyling vehicle and opened the container. He said, I want to be careful here, because it was dark, and it was 40 meters away, and I've gone over it in my head 100 times since, and I know memory does things over 100 repetitions. But what I thought I saw, what I still think I saw, is that the container wasn't just boxes. There was something on a gurney, under a sheet, and one of the two people checked something, a clipboard, a tablet, I couldn't tell, against whatever was under the sheet, the way you'd check a delivery against a manifest. Checked it against a manifest. He said, I drove off before they noticed me. I never took that route again. I told my employer I had a family thing, took a different round. I left the job about 2 months later. I've thought about that night more than almost anything else in my life, and I have never told anyone, because there's nothing to tell. I saw a shape under a sheet at night from 40 meters away. That's it. That's all I have. That's all I have, too. I want to be exactly as careful as N was. I am not telling you that N saw a body. I am telling you that a man who spent a year doing unremarkable, regulated medical waste haulage for a subcontractor working with Greyling Clinical Solutions saw one thing, one night, that he has never been able to stop thinking about, and it involved a manifest, and something under a sheet, at a lay-by, at night, 2 years ago. I asked N, in my reply, whether he remembered which hospital the collections came from. He hasn't answered yet. I hope he does. I also understand, completely, if he doesn't. I want to try now to do something I've been putting off. I want to try to answer the question the caller gave me 3 weeks ago. Not because I have an answer. I want to be clear, painfully clear that I don't. But because I think you deserve to see the shape I'm circling, even if I can't yet say what's at the center of it. What is she now part of? Here is everything we know, laid out together for the first time. Elara Voss found a discrepancy in planning records. A site, Callaway, officially closed, actually operating under a government contract classified under something called Schedule 7, a designation for materials and activities exempt from public disclosure. She walked toward that site at 2:47 in the morning, looking, the footage shows, like someone who knew exactly where she was going. And then nothing. 43 seconds and gone. The site itself, blacked out windows on a building that's supposedly empty. New, expensive surveillance on a road that's supposedly abandoned. A gray car connected to a government contractor framework, willing to spend 40 minutes making sure I knew I'd been seen. And an effluent survey, the only document in this entire case that wasn't curated, that exists only because somewhere, someone followed an environmental regulation without thinking about what it revealed, describing continuous industrial operation, cooling demand, and organic load. Signed by Greyling Clinical Solutions, a medical waste company, operating, according to its own national license, at 6 sites, at least one of which doesn't physically exist anymore. And a driver, 2 years ago, watching 2 people check something under a sheet against a manifest, at night, at a lay-by, as part of Greyling's regular operations. I am going to say the theory now, once. And then I am going to immediately tell you all the ways it might be wrong, because that's the discipline this broadcast has tried to hold from the first night, and I'm not going to abandon it now just because the shape in front of me is darker than anything we've looked at yet. The theory is this. Schedule 7 sites, Callaway and at least 5 others, are not storage, and they're not processing in the industrial sense the word usually means. I think they are something closer to what N described at a much smaller scale. A node where something, someone, arrives, under documentation that describes it in terms generic enough to mean anything. Organic load, cooling demand, a manifest checked against what's under the sheet. What she is now part of is not a question about Elara's fate in the past tense. I think it's a question about an inventory. Now, the other side. Here is why this might be wrong, and I want these reasons held with equal weight, because a theory this dark deserves more scrutiny than a comfortable one, not less. First, medical waste logistics genuinely is a strange, opaque industry, full of language that sounds sinister and isn't. Organic load is a real, boring regulatory term used on thousands of permits for thousands of completely unremarkable facilities. 6 sites with messy planning records could simply be 6 sites where paperwork was never updated. Bureaucratic decay is real, and I built an entire series on how much of it there is. Second, N's account is a single, uncorroborated memory, 2 years old, of something seen at 40 meters in the dark. He said so himself, more honestly than I could have asked. Third, and this is the one I keep returning to. If I'm right, this is not a story about one missing journalist anymore. It's a story about a system, operating for at least 4 years, across at least 6 sites, and Elara Voss is the only person who ever got close enough to it to disappear. Which means either I'm wrong, or there have been others before her who never got close enough to be noticed at all. I don't know which possibility frightens me more. On Thursday, the detective called for the 3rd time, and this call was different from the first 2, in a way that I think matters more than anything that was actually said. The detective didn't ask me anything, didn't warn me about anything. The first thing the detective said was, "I've been moved off this case." I asked what that meant. The detective said, "It means what it sounds like. As of yesterday, the Elara Voss file has been reassigned. I was told it's a resourcing decision." I've been a detective for 16 years. I know what a resourcing decision sounds like, and I know what it sounds like when someone's making sure it sounds like one. I asked who it had been reassigned to. The detective said, "That's the thing. It hasn't been reassigned to anyone in this building. It's been reassigned to a unit I'd never heard of, under a designation I'd never heard of. And when I asked my own superintendent for a contact name, I was told, and I'm quoting this exactly because I wrote it down the second I got off the phone with them, that information isn't held at this level." That information isn't held at this level? 16 years on the force, and the detective had never once heard those words used about a missing persons case, about a case file, a piece of paper, reassigned to a unit that doesn't appear in any directory the detective has access to, and a superintendent who can't, or won't, say where it went. The detective said, "I'm telling you this because I don't think anyone else is going to. And because, and this is the part I want to get right, because I think it's the bravest thing anyone in an official capacity has said to me in 25 days. Because somebody should know that the last thing that happened to this case, before it disappeared into whatever that designation is, was that I told you the truth about the footage. And I think that's connected. I don't know how, but I think it's connected. And I think you should be careful. And I think, for what it's worth, I think you're the only chance this case has left of staying a case, instead of becoming whatever Greyling's paperwork would call it." And then the detective said, "Don't call this number again. It won't be active by tomorrow." And the line went dead, for what I believe is the last time. I want to close the investigative thread of this episode with what F and I decided, together, on Tuesday, because I think it's the right call, and I want you to understand the reasoning, not just the outcome. F is stepping back, fully this time. Not because she's frightened, though she is, and she has every right to be, but because she's given me everything she has, and everything she has, combined, is now bigger than either of us individually carrying it safely. What she gave me, in the end, beyond the list of 6 sites, was something I'm calling, for now, between us, the map. It's not a literal map. It's the 6 site names, the dates of their Greyling registrations, and the local authority areas they sit in. 6 points, scattered across the country, each one a place where, on some date in the last 4 years, a company whose business is described in terms generic enough to mean anything, formally registered to operate at a site that officially doesn't operate. One of those 6 points is near a city I've never been to, in a part of the country I have no connection to. And 3 days ago, completely independently, before F gave me the map, before I had any of this, I received a message. From a woman who said her brother went missing 11 months ago, walked out for a run one evening and never came back. She said the police treated it as a likely accident, a fall, a river nearby, a body never recovered. She said she'd listened to my broadcasts about Elara and something about the timeline, the way the investigation had gone quiet, the way nobody seemed to be looking in the place that mattered, felt familiar. The town she named is 11 miles from one of the 6 sites on F's map. 11 miles. 11 months before Elara. I haven't told this woman about the map. I haven't told her about Greyling, or Schedule 7, or any of it. I don't know yet whether her brother's disappearance has anything to do with any of this. 11 miles is not nothing, but it's not nothing in a country where most things are within 11 miles of something. But I am going to find out. Carefully. The way Elara would have. The way F has, at enormous cost to herself, for 3 weeks. F, if you're listening, thank you doesn't cover it, and I'm not going to pretend it does. What you gave me changes the shape of everything. I'm going to carry it the way you'd want it carried. Slowly, carefully, and out loud. Eventually, when it's safe to be loud. You did more than your share. You did more than anyone's share. Go be safe now. That's the job for you now. "25 days. Here is where this stands. The second company is Greyling Clinical Solutions, a medical waste logistics firm whose public business description is true and tells you nothing. Greyling holds an active waste license for 6 sites, including Callaway, one of which doesn't physically exist anymore according to its own local council. A driver who worked adjacent to Greyling's operations 2 years ago describes a single night that has haunted him since. A manifest, checked against something under a sheet, at a lay-by, in the dark. The detective who has guided me, carefully, at real cost, for 3 weeks, has been removed from the case. The file reassigned to a unit that doesn't officially exist, at a level the detective's own superiors can't or won't name. And 11 miles from one of Greyling's 6 sites, 11 months before Elara Voss disappeared, a man went out for a run and never came home. I said 3 weeks ago that this was no longer a line of inquiry, that it was a promise. I want to update that promise tonight, because the shape of it has changed, and you deserve to know how. This was never just about Elara. I think Elara found the edge of something that has existed, quietly, for years, in at least 6 places, and that the system around it is large enough, and careful enough, to remove a 16-year detective from a case with a phone call and a sentence about resourcing. What she is now part of might not be a question with an answer that has Elara's name on it specifically. It might be a question about all of them, however many them turns out to be. I'm not going to Callaway again. Not for a while. The next site I look at will be the one near the woman whose brother went running and never came back. Carefully, with everything F taught me about doing this safely, and with her map, which I intend to honor by going slowly enough that it's still useful when I'm done. To the woman whose brother is missing. I'm not going to say your name, or his, not yet. But I heard you, and I'm coming. To F, thank you, truly. Be safe. Be loud again only when you're ready, if you ever are, and not a moment before. Point 6 is still safe, still being fed. I checked again this week, small mercies, and I'm holding on to every one I can find right now. This is cold frequency. The signal returns in 7 days. 6 sites. At least 6. I'm going to find out what at least means.